I press?
First, you need
I'm pressing the red button. Shit. Now the screen's all fucked up. Shit's broken.
Okay, press the alternate key. ALT alternate.
Alt. There's no fucking alt. I got a fucking squiggly line key. I got a fucking key with a triangle on it. What the fuck kind of keyboard is this anyway?
Oh, James, calm down. There should be a button with a blue square on it.
Okay, that's more like it. Bringing up the personnel database. All right, got the location.
Don't forget to log off.
Yeah.
Terminal 4 is currently logged on with no personnel present. Please return to your station and commence proper log-off procedure.
Fuck off. I hate computers.
Greetings everyone from the hell year 2020, the year of pandemics and political upheaval and general bad shit really. The only good thing that I've really been able to count on this year is video games for the most part, although even then we've had endless controversies in the industry about crunch and Ubisoft's going through a whole lot of assault allegations at the moment. Basically, the world is shit and we can't count on anything, but at least we can make some joy out of video games, including how better to escape the horrors of a global pandemic than by talking about Prototype 2, which is a video game about a horrible pandemic. To be fair, it's not a global pandemic in the game, it's mostly around New York City, because why does everything happen in New York? I know America thinks that it's the center of the world, and we kind of play into that fantasy, but it's funny how the first prototype is like, oh no, there's this horrible thing in New York, and then the second one's like, oh no, it's happening again. The exciting thing about this impulsive ramble video that I'm recording now is I'm actually playing Prototype 2 on my Xbox 360 newfangled video game machine as you listen to this. Can you hear the controller? I'm not telling fibs, you can hear it, it's happening. Yeah, literally what happened was a couple of months ago I realized I hadn't put anything on the channel in 1,000 years, and I sort of panicked, and I did a Hitman video that I actually quite enjoy looking back on. It's because I recorded it in the midst of my sort of Hitman honeymoon that I'm now sadly out of. I did burn out on Hitman a bit after playing pretty much nothing but Hitman for about a month. That's an exaggeration. I did play other games in between, but I played a lot of Hitman in the space of a few weeks. Got most of the way through Hitman 2, and then burned out and needed to do something else in my life. I stopped selling death sticks, and I went home and rethought my life. But I have been playing games from the Boomerang website, which is a rental site, like I mentioned before. I like how I'm like previously on my life, as if you're likely to have remembered an obscure video from 2 months ago. I've been enjoying a website I discovered this year called Boomerang Rentals, which I think is only in the UK and possibly Ireland, but possibly not Northern Ireland for much longer. Oh no, politics. It's a rental site in the UK called Boomerang, and literally, you know, you pay however much a month. They've got a whole bunch of different tiers you can pick from, and they send you games. So it's like Blockbuster, only you don't have the kind of nice experience of walking into Blockbuster and being like, oh, I'll get some jelly beans and some popcorn, and I'll get the Smurfs movie to keep the bloody kids quiet for an evening. You don't get that experience, but you do get shit posted first class to you off the website. You can have 1 or 2 games. Anyway, it's a whole thing. And I've been playing Prototype 2 because I never owned an Xbox 360 until this year, and I justified buying this like cheap old console that isn't actually much of an expense anymore. Unless you get one of the really old crappy ones that are likely to give you the red ring of death, I would strongly recommend not getting one of the extremely cheap 360s you can find on eBay, because if you read the description it probably says somewhere in there that it either has the red ring of death or it is one of the early models that is likely to red ring after a year or two. So I got a 360 for the first time just because I've never owned one, and I can finally play games like Prototype that, it's not exclusive, but I'd never played the second Prototype. I own the first Prototype on PS3, and I got most of the way through it, and then do you ever have that thing happen in a game where you're enjoying yourself, but then you just hit a difficulty spike, and there's just this one mission where it's kind of just a whole bunch of janky shits going on, and you're supposed to defend something. I hate, like, sandbox games where they always have that one level where you have to defend something. Infamous did this as well. There's a level in Infamous where you have to defend a van, and it's just always the point in the game where I lose interest and stop playing. Prototype had the same thing, but there's another issue where you can't change the difficulty in the middle of the game, which is something I take a lot of issue with sometimes. Because I got to that bit and I was like, well, I'll just turn down the difficulty. I don't really care about beating it on hard mode, but it won't let me. So now I'm stuck on the hard mode. I think it might just be normal. Actually, I might be bigging myself up retroactively and lying to myself. I think it might just be on normal mode. But you know what I mean? I just want to get through the game. I don't care about being the master Prototype expert. But that was frustrating, and I'm sure I could beat it if I tried hard enough. But then I thought, well, I've already had someone spoil the story for me for Prototype 1 at some point, so I could always just play Prototype 2. And I went, oh gosh darn, I don't own Prototype 2. And I went, oh golly gosh. I don't know why I talk like I'm from the 18th century or something. Golly gosh, He-Man. He-Man, known 18th century aristocrat. I think I was going for like a Batman and Robin thing there, and I got my pop culture confused. I'm playing Prototype 2. It's pretty good, and in fact, I'll tell you what, this is breaking news. 60 minutes ago, I beat Prototype 2, and I had a jolly solid good time. The nice thing about renting games is I tend to be more forgiving. I think I mentioned before, I really liked Star Wars Fallen Order when I rented that a few months ago. And it's not that I couldn't pick that game apart. It's not that I couldn't say, well, the story could have done this, and there's a bit of backtracking, and I don't think the higher difficulty levels are balanced very well. It seems like most games are balanced around a normal difficulty, and then everything after that is kind of an afterthought, Prototype 2 is nothing special, and may not age very well, and it has a strange number of things cut that were in the first game, which might be why I don't hear people talk about it very much compared to the first one. I hear a lot of people kind of hold the first one with some affection, but I don't hear them talk about Prototype 2 as much. I think a lot of that is because it adds some things but then removes a bunch of things, so it kind of ends up being almost exactly the same level of quality but in a different way, which I can respect. I respect that not every feature is worth keeping, but they took out a lot of I should probably explain what the hell Prototype 2 is if you don't know what I'm talking about. Prototype as a game series, you play as like just this poor chap who's like a living cancer cell, basically. He's got this horrible virus, but mysteriously he gets all of the advantages and none of the downsides. He's got cheat mode on, basically. It's like if Rico Rodriguez caught COVID. I think he'd just kind of power through and become a superhero somehow and just continue flying around with a jetpack like he usually does. Jetpack, parachute, those are similar words, they mean similar things. So you have tentacle arms, and you can turn your hands into swords, and it sounds like the most cartoonish, just super villain shit. And I think the first Prototype in particular kind of had a really weird thing where they tried to make... I think they took their main character really seriously, but didn't really give him much of a motivation. I think he has amnesia at the beginning, and, it's like, oh, what's going on? I'm going to find out. And, of course, the military are cracking down, trying to put quarantine on the city, so you're fighting mutants and you're fighting the military. It's good fun. I think one of the most entertaining things about Prototype... Oh, dear, I'm currently shooting a big, giant, stompy monster in Prototype. I had the bright idea this time, and I should have thought this last time when I was doing the Hitman video, actually, of actually playing the game while I'm talking about it, because this way you will get live, oh shit, I meant to mention this sort of comments. Currently I'm fighting a massive monster, so I'm going to swap to my blades and just like chop him in the face a bunch. It is a solid good time. One thing I like about the Prototype games is it does remind me of my childhood and playing games like Spider-Man 2, there's going to be like 3 games called Spider-Man 2 very soon. It's very confusing. Spider-Man 2, the movie Spider-Man 2 game, not the completely unrelated Spider-Man 2 that was on PlayStation. So confusing. Spider-Man 2, the movie, the Peter Jackson official King Kong game of the movie Spider-Man 2. I grew up playing a lot of those sort of like janky sandboxy games. I'd throw something like the Pandemic game. Okay, that's a bit unfair, but I played a lot of those sort of sandboxy games where they might not be extremely well balanced, but they were just fun to run around and level up a bit sometimes. And in Destroy All Humans, which is another Pandemic sandbox game, you can literally like blow people's brains up and eat their brains to get more powers, so that was good. Which is pretty similar to what you do in Prototype, actually. You just run around and you can consume people like Venom, actually. In the Ultimate Spider-Man PS2 game, you can also play as Venom, which was by far the best part. I was always so disappointed when the game took away control and made you play Spider-Man again. I'm like, no, I want to play Venom. It's only at the very end of the game that you actually can just run around as Venom in the sandbox, so it's a very fun reward. So you get claws, you get tentacles, you get all these things. One thing I will say about Prototype 2 specifically is I really think they simultaneously have more of a sense of humor about themselves. There's a lot of like little comments, and I think the guy you play as this guy called Hella, who is hella badass. He's a soldier, but then he gets infected by the virus, and he thinks his daughter's dead and all this stuff, so he's gonna try and get revenge on the guy who gave him the virus and killed his daughter, all this stuff basically. It's nothing spectacular, but I think it kind of is elevated by the performance and the characters, and just you've got the gameplay which is solid and consistently entertaining. When I was running around the city, it kind of had that. Speaking of Spider-Man, I recently this year played the entirety, including the DLC, of the Spider-Man PS4 game, which is not only the best Spider-Man game ever by some margin, it's also probably one of the best sandbox games ever. It's just magnificent beginning to end, basically. And it kind of, makes me wish that the Arkham games were good again, because there was a time when the Arkham games were kind of the King Kong on top of the building of sandbox games. I was trying to think of something to do with buildings, and for some reason I thought of King Kong. But of course, I guess that's appropriate, because King Kong famously does fall off the building and die, so I guess that's appropriate analogy. I recovered. What was I talking about? Prototype 2 story. It's a perfectly serviceable story, but I think it's elevated by the fact that Hella is quite an entertaining character, and you feel sorry for him because he's a clear victim at the beginning of this story. And the corporation and the military that are involved, like with the virus, they're where the virus came from, and that's not a spoiler, that's just an established fact by the beginning of Prototype 2, at least. And I think Hella is a very good character because, he's sympathetic, but he also has a lot of sort of deadpan humor, and he'll just be very angry about things. People are trying to, there'll be bad characters who are trying to bribe him or something, and he just interrupts them by saying something like, "Shut the fuck up, you," and just punches them in the face and stuff like that. And there's a side quest where someone tries to what was it? Oh yeah, there's a side quest where a soldier has put out a challenge to Hella, "Hey, you're killing all my friends, you suck, Hella." And then Hella just phones up his friend who does all the admin thing, basically, "Ring ring, hello, do you know where this bad man lives?" And she just says, "Oh yeah, here he is, go fuck him up, Hella." He's like, "Thanks." And he goes and fucks him up. It's funny how they kind of have a bit of fun with the gameplay formula. This is probably going to be a shorter video than the Hitman one, because there isn't as much to say about Prototype. It's no masterpiece like Hitman 2016, Hitman 2. Don't get me fucking started about Hitman again. I talked about Hitman for 50 minutes straight, and I'm getting that itch. I'm getting that itch again, because I'm most of the way through Hitman 2. I'm not going to talk about it, except I already am. In fact, I think I've already mentioned it previously in this same discussion. Prototype 2 is pretty good. It's a very solid. I'll tell you what, it's got me wanting to. I want to play through the first prototype on the lower difficulty. I do this a lot, where I will, if I've beaten the game before, especially, I'll often just knock it down to the easy mode and play it with a podcast or whatever. But I'd like to play prototype 1 again to get to the point where I got stuck on the harder difficulty before, and then I might start paying attention to the story again. It's been a funny thing, this whole renting business, because I've played a lot of games this year that I might have never bothered spending money on, but I'm glad that I had the chance to play. Gosh, I wish I had the list in front of me. Literally, I have rented like 30 games this year and haven't really regretted any one of them. I played, oh god, such a terrible name, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu, which is essentially a remake of Yellow from, the Gen 1 Pokemon games. And I got about, not quite halfway through, and I thought, well, this is just Yellow, which I have played before, and I might rent this again and finish it another time, but this is, I will say, I think this is kind of revealing the fact that I have my vision. I guess I can talk more generally about this. I have this vision I've been coming up with recently for this channel where I did a lot of Let's Plays for a long time, and I have a lot of fond memories of doing Let's Plays, but then I got distracted by some real life stuff, and then I tried to do some reviews, which I might still do, and I liked the reviews because I like having a script that I can just read, and I like doing the video editing. One issue with reviews is I find it really hard to write them and not just sound like... I like to try and keep some personality in a critique, even if it's like a serious, like, I really didn't like this sort of critique or whatever. I like to have little jokes, and I really struggle to make reviews not all sound the same, at least to me. Maybe it's just because I have some, I'm used to my mannerisms, I guess, but... Like, I was thinking of doing a Prototype 2 review, and then I thought, but I could just talk about it and not have to, like, get the words out of my brain. I meant to mention at the beginning, by the way, I hope you might be able to hear the 360 in the background, because it's extraordinarily loud. I'll tell you very quick, funny, it's related. I'm playing it on the thing right now, you can hear the controller. I'll tell you the funny story about the 360, which isn't funny at all, actually. I wanted to get a 360, and you can get one in decent condition for 60 or 70 quid these days. It's an Xbox 360S, which I specifically wanted to get a model like that because that's one of the later models where they fixed the horrible defects that, like, I watched a little mini documentary about the Red Ring of Death and how, like, it really was a titanic hardware problem, largely a result of Microsoft rushing the console to market. And it's bad that they let that happen, and frankly I think Nintendo is having a milder example of this sort of thing going on now, because as much as I love the Switch, the Joy-Con drift has been a known issue for about 2 or 3 years now. For almost as long as the Switch has existed, people have been complaining about Joy-Cons breaking after after a year or so. What the hell was I talking about? Oh yeah, so the funny story with my Xbox was I specifically went on eBay and found one that fit the kind of model that I wanted, and it said tested and refurbished. So I thought, well, this is perfect, it looks like it's from a decent seller, this seems to be the perfect sort of thing, and I'll buy the console and then I can rent the games, and that's how I justified getting a PS4 this year as well, is because, and it worked out brilliantly because I've rented tons of games, including Hitman. By buying the hardware, I can now just rent the games for a flat yearly fee, and it saves a remarkable amount of money, honestly, and I'd be very sad if, like, next year or something, Boomerang just went under, just as I've discovered them. But the funny thing with the Xbox was, it arrived, and for about 10 minutes everything seemed fine, and then the disc tray started to fuck up. And the funny thing about this is I had almost the exact same problem happen with my original Xbox, as in, I don't know what you call it, the Xbox original, the Xbox Zero. You can't call it the Xbox One anymore, that's confusing. My Xbox Zero. the disc tray would either get stuck inside the console or refuse to go back in the console, and sometimes it would just continually go in and out trying to decide, it wasn't working. But I managed to talk to the seller and got them to agree to pay. I would take it to be repaired with someone, and they would pay the damage, basically. So I walked for 3 hours in quite hot weather because I didn't want to get a bus, you see, during a pandemic, you see. The best laid plans of eBay sellers. When I say walked for 3 hours, I was like there and back was 3 hours. And I did like take a rest and have some water in the middle. But I took it to get this guy to get it repaired, and he fixed it and it's been fine ever since. And that is the story. But I guess it worked out fine, but it's funny to me how nothing like that had happened to me before, where I specifically... I don't think you can sell your console as refurbished and tested, and then like within 10 minutes of me using it, I noticed a crippling flaw. I'm going to talk about Prototype 2 again now, I swear. It's very much kind of, you see what you get. I guess the question is, would I recommend Prototype 2 over the first one? I think I would, to be honest. I think they're very, very similar in terms of overall quality. There are some things, the first one, I think it's more of a kind of... The second one cuts out a bunch of powers and stuff, which I assume it was done for time or something, or for balance purposes. It does feel like a more balanced, sort of thought-out design overall. I think the first Prototype is much more of a kitchen sink approach, which I can appreciate. Like a game, I'm trying to think, there are kitchen sink games like the original Deus Ex, where half those mechanics are conceptually interesting but do not work remotely at all, It's possible to glitch your character on the main menu of Deus Ex, let alone the actual game. So I think Prototype 1 is good for that kind of like, just here's all the powers and they don't have to make sense or be balanced, but here you are. But I actually had a much more consistently enjoyable time with Prototype 2, and that was despite playing most of the first one. I was worried that it would feel too similar and I'd get bored halfway through again, but I didn't. I beat it actually in 4 days flat. I'm just playing a bit more today, and then I'm going to send it back tomorrow, and that'll be good. They've also just sent me Boomerang. They've sent me another console I never owned until this year. So I'm not sure Boomerang's actually saved me money, because I've been buying old Xboxes, and they've sent me Mario for the 3DS, Mario Maker 3DS, which rationally I'm sure has been rendered redundant by the existence of Mario Maker 2 on the Switch, but I don't own a Wii U, so I can't play the first. The Wii U is like the only console I can't really justify buying, because it's still about 100 or 150 quid from what I've seen, and all of the good Wii U games are slowly coming to Switch. Like just this year we've had Pikmin 3 has just come out, or is about to, and early next year is Mario 3D World, which again was literally, there's only like 2 or 3 games left on Wii U that I'd really be interested in that you can't get elsewhere. Nintendo Land is one of the I'm just talking about the Wii U now, what the hell's going on? Nintendo Land is one of the best like local multiplayer games you could ever play, and it's a real shame that the specificness of that game would make it slightly hard to port. I think you could put it on the Switch, but it would take quite a lot of adjustments. I just missed the Luigi's Mansion minigame, basically, where you're a ghost and your friends have to chase you around. So good. So good. I understand why the Wii U failed, but I am sad sometimes, because we had Nintendo Land, and I don't think we'll ever have it again. Treasure your Nintendo Land. It's better than fucking 1-2 Switch, which... Okay, I admit I haven't played it yet, so I can't actually comment on it, but literally everyone and their mum has said this is so much worse than something like Nintendo Land. This is something you'll play for an hour and go, oh, that's fun, I'll show the kids, they'll like that for an hour, and then you'll just never think about it again. 40 quid, please. I'll have to get that on Boomerang. Look, Prototype 2 is pretty good. Maybe these next... I feel like I had more to say about Hitman, like I said. I'll plan ahead a bit more. Look, I'm still beating up this big Goliath monster. Um, there wasn't, I think Prototype 2 is the sort of game where nothing much jumped out about me as being wrong, but that doesn't mean that it's brilliant and perfect. Like I said, Spider-Man PS4 earlier, that's a game which I honestly struggle to find meaningful criticism of. The biggest issue I had with Spider-Man PS4 was just that a lot of the gadgets feel a bit sort of throwaway and situational, and they don't do that thing that the Arkham games do, where you don't just bring up a menu in Arkham to swap your gadgets. You can actually press different button combos like R1 and up or something to just instantly use that gadget. And because of how the combo system works with the multipliers, you're encouraged to remember all these button combos and then just use as many different moves and gadgets in a fight as possible. And Spider-Man doesn't quite have that, and that is one of the only things. It is much less smooth to just pause time with a menu and select a thing. I'm talking about a different sandbox game now. I should just do a Spider-Man video from the sounds of things. I've mentioned it multiple times. You can enjoy Prototype. It's very good as like I need to just, I mean, I should mention, I think it's on PS4 and Xbone these days as well. I'm not sure if it exists as a physical copy. It might only be a download. Because of obviously my Boomerang rental scheme that I've got going on now, I really resent if a game is digital only, because it means I can't borrow it. There are some weird exceptions that Boomerang just randomly won't have. Like, I don't think they have Zone of the Enders on PS4, even though I've got the PS2 version. I just wanted to try the PS4 version, just, for a change. Why am I talking about every game except Prototype? Look, the other funny thing, actually, and this is Prototype related, I very quickly had something I worked out that I like to do for these sort of videos is there are channels on YouTube which are just long play archives where they have people upload entire playthroughs of games with no commentary or anything. And some of those channels say in the description, feel free to use our footage, just put a credit in the video. And that's brilliant for someone like me who doesn't want to have to record 5 hours of random background footage. But annoyingly, I haven't actually been able to find any footage of Prototype or Prototype 2 that would actually fit this description. It may exist, I might just have to look further, but I don't want to use a bunch of footage if there isn't like an explicit disclaimer. So it'll be interesting to see what I come up with. I like to have background footage in these things. Oh well. While I'm thinking of other Prototype things to talk about, what else have I... This is part of my vision for this channel, is I want to finish the LA Noire series, which I'm like 3/4 of the way through that game. But my vision for the channel at the moment is, my new idea I've had is these rambles, these Gay Station 64 rambles, which is the current... I don't know what else to call them other than rambles. I was calling them podcasts for a while, and I'm like, I guess you could call them that, but podcast in my mind requires at least 2 people. I don't think you can call it a podcast if there's just one person going, hello, here's my Xbox story. I've just chopped up a beastie. I'm impressed at the sheer amount of gore in Prototype. Even after playing the first one, I'm still impressed. There's a whole crap ton of just... I still think Prototype 2, it hits a better tone than the first game, because the sheer ridiculousness of, like, the superpower of being this virus man, it seems very ill-defined. And they have this kind of Highlander thing going on, where if you kill other mutants, you get more powerful in a very vague and hard to define way. And I should have established at the beginning of the episode I should have just established at the beginning if I was going to do spoilers or not. Damn, I should plan ahead more. I might just talk spoilers from this point on. Okay, here's your official... There's not a lot of story to spoil in Prototype 2. To be fair, yeah, okay, there we go. There's your warning. Here we go. Here it comes. Here is the spoilers. Go play Prototype 2. It's probably very cheap. I will say, do your research for the PC versions of Prototype 1 and 2, because I had a bad experience trying to play the first one on PC at some point. So definitely look into that. Maybe there's a like remastered edition or something that works better, but definitely I recommend something like PC Gaming Wiki for pretty much any old game on PC at this point, because ever since the fucking horror story I had with trying to play King Kong, there's some versions of the Peter Jackson King Kong game on PC that have Secure ROM, I think it's called, and that is awful. It can actually like mess up your computer, and I didn't realize this, and I think I had a lucky escape where I managed to reboot it and like, eject the disc. Like I say it like it's got the plague or something. Anyway, so here comes the spoiler discussion, and goodbye to everyone else. You know, wear a mask, have fun. People who don't want spoilers, goodbye. Like and subscribe. Good stuff. So everyone dies, basically. No, that's not true. I was pleasantly surprised for such a grim story and such a grumbly, angry character. I was pleasantly surprised that Hella has a decently happy ending. Like, it's kind of weird what they did to Mercer, who is actually... I like the idea. I'm glad they didn't just have the same main character. I think more series should be willing to change their protagonists. Like, off the top of my head, I mentioned Deus Ex earlier. It was actually cool that when they rebooted the franchise with Human Revolution, they didn't just have the same Deus Ex man. They didn't just have JC Denton again. And actually, you know, JC Denton has only actually been, because like a lot of people, I forget that Invisible War exists, and there's a third character who you play as instead of JC in that, so that's actually a good example of a franchise where you've never just had the one protagonist. Yeah, there's loads. Like I've even said this about Hitman. I kind of think, you know, the Hitman series is in a great place right now, but after this current trilogy, one thing they could do is just take the gameplay concept and just have fun with it. Like, he's already done like every continent in the world, Agent 47. So you might as well just do like an Assassin's Creed like storyline almost, where it's like, oh, here's the assassins of the 20th century instead of the... that was a bad example, because I guess the first Hitman was probably set in the 20th century. Here's the Hitman of 10,000 BC killing other cavemen. There you go. Brilliant. Perfect. But at the end of Prototype 2, he actually kills Mercer, who is kind of turned into a cartoonish supervillain at this point, despite... I mean, he was never a very interesting character, but it was like a bit of a waste of this interest. It's an interesting situation to change your protagonist and have the older protagonist be the new villain, but to then just have him be quite a two-dimensional, I'm gonna advance the world and everyone will be just like me, you know, he's pretty boring. I like how the game, you have a prologue in like the ruined red district of it's called the red light district. I think that's what my subconscious is trying to go there, straight to the sexy thing. No, it's called the red zone, which is like I guess the middle of New York, where everything has been fucked up from the first game. There's a little prologue in the red zone, and then you go to the yellow and the green zone. In that order, actually. It's strange how you go to yellow and then green and then back to red, but whatever. And then by the time you get to the red zone, it is really fucked up, so it's kind of cool to see just... It's nice how things escalate in that way. And there's and Hella has another couple of, like, the closest I think I ever came to associating with Mercer. I almost forgot his name right there. Mercer in the first game, he's just too grumbly and lacks any sense of humour. The closest I came to ever feeling sympathy for him was right at the beginning, and he has like a sister or something. But all of the characters in that game are just... It's a game with a lot of dialogue, but none of it really matters. And again, I'm not saying Prototype 2 is high art. If anything, I'm saying it's an example of how just a little bit of character and atmosphere kind of elevate your story, especially because if the gameplay is good, which it is in Prototype, you don't need much of a story anyway. So yeah, it's fine. It's good. It's fine. It's great. It's a good, solid, good time. I can see Prototype being a cult favorite for some people. It's not one of my favorites. It's not even one of my favorite sandbox games on the 360. Probably not. But it does take me back. Like I said earlier, it takes me back to Gosh, I also played Just Cause 3 this year, didn't I? I played so many fucking games, and they're all starting to blur together, I swear. I actually tried to do a list not too long ago, as all the games I've played to at least a decent amount this year, and not only have I finished a shocking number of them, but there are 40 games I've played. I haven't finished that many. I've only finished about half of those, but it's still scary. Yeah, because I haven't finished Hitman, for instance. So I finished the first Hitman, technically. Being shot at by a helicopter right now. I'm very depressed that I don't think I'll be able to use any good footage for this video. I'll just have a picture of a chicken or something. That'll be just as good. I can feel my energy fading. I'll try and come up with something. No. Oh, okay. I will mention. I'm surprised we haven't had a whisper of a hit of a Prototype 3. I don't think the second one sold that well. I think the first one was surprising. It's funny what game companies sometimes decide is a failure, but they probably had the first game, which sold better than they expected, and then they told the shareholders, oh yeah, the second one, it will just be like Dead Space 3, it will sell 5 million copies, and then we'll be surprised when it doesn't sell that many. I'm still bitter about Dead Space 3, I always will be, but that's what these companies did. Was it EA, actually? Was it EA? I don't think it was, actually. I think it was Activision. I could look it up, but I'm very lazy. I'm just running up the Empire State Building at the moment. Oh, you know what? I've just thought I'm going to talk more about some... I've talked about the basic gist of the gameplay, running around, chopping people up, basically. But you can do some surprising stuff, even in the Prototype 2, where they took out a few things. You can hijack tanks and things. You can hijack helicopters at a certain point in the game. Which is not only incredibly useful, they balance it quite nicely, actually, because if you can get into a tank, it has a lot of firepower, obviously. But it's also very slow, and you are much more maneuverable in the tank in your default state. Whereas the tank, by the time you've hijacked it, you've often taken a lot of damage by the time you start moving. So when you can first hijack them, they're really useful, but I found by the time you get to the red zone, there's often just so much shit crawling all over the place that you take so much damage so quickly. It's not necessarily worth it. And there's also a stealth element I completely forgot to mention, which is... here's all the things that people who were looking forward to at the beginning of the video are now like, oh, here they are. Here's the further gameplay discussion. I think they improved the stealth. It's very rudimentary. It's not even as deep as something like Arkham, I'd say. At least in Arkham you can sneak around and you have a few gadgets. You pretty much have one trick. In Prototype 2 at least you have pretty much two tricks when you're sneaking, because you can... When you consume people, you take on their shape. So long as someone doesn't see you take on a disguise, they'll think you're just one of them. There's certain detectors that can sense that you've got a virus and stuff. But basically, if you disguise yourself as a guard, it's just like Hitman. You can just run around a base with impunity for the most part, and you can do funny things like unleash monsters, which I immediately started doing as soon as I realised you could do that. They added a cool feature, actually. You've got what could loosely be called a detective vision mode, except it's called hunting vision or something, and it works a bit differently because at certain points in the game you have to track certain people down in the city, and you press the hunting mode button and it sends out a pulse, and you have to see when it gets to your prey, it'll pulse back, so you have to see which direction it's coming from and then track them down by seeing where it's coming from. And it's much easier to do if you climb a building first. But it's a very, very simple mechanic, but it kind of reminds me a little bit very loosely of something like the Witcher vision in Witcher 3, which is a similar sort of detective mode button. But again, in Witcher 3, they get away with it because there's a lot of like dialogue of like Geralt who'll be like, "Oh, he was crawling on the ground, and then this must be where he got stabbed," and they take a simple mechanic, and I think the hunting mode, it works because it encourages you to clamber all over buildings, then you'll be like, "Aha, he's over there," and you'll run off. It's just a little change like that makes the mechanic much more engaging. I think that's something that I have my problems with Breath of the Wild. Even though it's the first Zelda game I've ever really got into, I have quite a few problems with it, but I do think Breath of the Wild, it captures that feeling of exploration better than almost any sandbox game I can think of, because you'll see something in the distance and you're like, "What's that? Oh, I've got to climb the mountain and get to that shrine or whatever," and there's a real tangible like having to scope out the area to find the, especially when you have low stamina at the beginning, having to scope out the mountain to find the easiest way to climb up, because you need a spot to get your stamina back halfway up and things like that. Oh, I've just stolen a helicopter while I'm talking, by the way. You can hijack vehicles, and you can also just rip their guns off them, which I thought was a great addition. I think that's new to this one, to Prototype 2. This is basically a review of both Prototype games. And in fact, I've spoiled the first game as well by telling you that Mercer is the villain of the second game, so... Oh well. Prototype game overview, I suppose. I'm surprised you haven't seen a second one, because they could do a lot of things. They could I wouldn't expect like a Spider-Man PS4 level of polish. I think these are kind of, it's not that they're mid-budget necessarily, it's just that they are much more kind of the Just Cause end of the sandbox spectrum versus the, I don't know if Breath of the Wild is necessarily the exact opposite end, but Breath of the Wild is much more a sort of slow, methodical, okay, yeah, it's a slow, methodical experience of exploration compared to Just Cause, which is like, ooh, a helicopter, I bet I could grapple it to this tank, and then they'll both fly into a plane and explode with these trip mines I put there, That's much more a sort of prototype atmosphere. Is much, if you like Just Cause, that's don't play it for the story, but Prototype 2 surprised me with how, decent the story is. I consider a story decent if it held my attention and I actually somewhat wanted to see what happened. There's a moment where you kind of have this rival in the military for most of the game, and then there's a moment where he figures out that you've been tricking him and impersonating someone. But Hela is just like, look man, I don't want to kill you, I just want to get my daughter back, and they have this sort of grudging respect for each other after that. Which I guess feels a bit unrealistic, because Hela has killed hundreds of soldiers by this point, So, doesn't make a complete sense, but what can you do? I thought actually that they were going to do a twist where Hela was impersonating one of the guys, one of the main top guys in the military, and I thought it would turn out that the other guy was Mercer the whole time. That would have been a good twist. I really thought they were going to do that at one point, and that didn't happen. I hate when I write a better story, and I'm like, I won't say what the movie is, but there's a movie that's like a quite well-beloved sci-fi darling of a movie. And I think it's fine, but I was disappointed with it. And this movie, about a third of the way through, I was like, oh, this is going to be this, isn't it? Oh, I bet that's what they're hinting at. So I predicted what the actual plot of the film was about a third of the way through, which doesn't usually happen. I'm usually a slow-witted child, basically. But then I thought, no, that twist is too obvious. It must be more to it. It must be a red herring. And I did have that a little bit with Prototype 2, where I thought something more interesting was going to happen, but it didn't quite work out. Oh, there's one more thing about the stealth, actually, and this was probably the biggest pleasant surprise with the stealth in the second game, is they give you a much more sort of... There was a funny feature in the first game, which they took out, but they replaced it with something possibly even funnier. In the first game, you get this distraction ability where you can, if you're in a disguise, you can just accuse random soldiers of being you. It's like, it's him, it's Mercer. And of course the guy's like, no, what? But all of his friends just immediately shoot him, and it's always funny. It's really funny to me that you just... And it's on like a cooldown, so you can't just point to 5 people at once, but every 30 seconds or so you can just go, it's him! And they will just obey and shoot their friend. In Prototype 2, though, they give you a more interesting ability where it's called the Bio Bomb, where Hella, like, he, like, stabs them, he, like, jabs them in the back of the neck and walks off. You have to do it when you're in disguise. And they start screaming as, like, their flesh is, like, melting, like that scene in RoboCop with the toxic waste. And then everyone's like, why is my friend screaming? And they all gather around, and then, of course, he explodes and takes out anyone nearby. And that's an extremely useful ability, not only because you can kill people, but because it's the only reliable way to distract people. If you can get a lot of the missions, you can get a surprising distance being stealthy, which is quite a surprising feature. It's very rudimentary stealth, but it is surprisingly fun. If you can beat a side quest without even setting off an alert, it is fun, and sometimes you can get a bonus for doing this. So a lot of the missions have little bonuses where it'll say, don't set off an alarm, or use this ability to kill the thing, or, you know, that's all nice. I can feel my throat seizing up now. All that virus I've clearly consumed from playing too much Prototype. It does feel funny how I've accidentally played and watched things this year which I didn't realise were about a virus, and then halfway through they turned out to be about a virus. I was like, no, it's too real. The moral of the story is, wear a fucking mask or the world will turn into Prototype 3. That's the twist. We don't want Prototype 3 to come out because that's just what our real world is slowly turning into. Maybe they knew something we didn't. I'm not saying hashtag Prototype Deep State or whatever, you know, Prototype Gate. I'm just saying, I'm not saying I do believe it, but I'm just saying it all lines up suspiciously well. So wear a mask or you too will turn into a man with tentacles for arms, and actually that sounds quite cool, so I'm getting mixed messages from Prototype, to be honest.